Hello and welcome to the Leading Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Dubose. Here in the Leading Lounge, we talk with today's leaders and unpack lessons learned and being learned from a career of leading and communicating in their field. These conversations are designed to be both informal and informative, and we want to equip you with wisdom and tools to empower you as a leader where you are and where you want to be. Hey everybody, welcome to Season 3 of the Leading Lounge. This is episode 17, the first episode of our third season. I hope you had a great summer. I want to start our third season off with just a really wonderful interview with an amazing man, Matt Hangen, who's the CEO of Water4. Water4 is a $12 million nonprofit that seeks to basically build sustainable business models to put water wells in remote places in Africa, but not just relying on charity to do it, but building sustainable local businesses there to ensure that underprivileged people have access to clean water and also get a sense of human dignity, something that brings them dignity because it is their work and their labor and their partnership that sustains it. So really wonderful mission and vision that Water4 has. But in this interview, Matt talks about his journey to get to be the CEO of Water4, and it's really moving, really inspirational. Matt grew up in rural Alabama and mentions that his first job was as a nut and bolt sorter and went all the way from there to the CEO of Water4, this $12 million nonprofit. Spent some time as a youth pastor and a missionary in Africa, and kind of imagined his journey going one way, and in fact, it has been so much more than he imagined it would be. He also talks about, and it's important, I think, to his story and to each of us in our lives, the impact that suffering had on him, that basically through having an extended illness where he was on the brink of death for a number of months, essentially forced him to do some serious evaluation into his own life and really matured him faster than life circumstances would, and help him see not only things about himself, but things about God and how he had uniquely gifted him and called him to serve. So it's a great story. Matt's an unbelievable person. You can look him up, and you can look up Water4 at Water4. That's the number 4.org. He's given TED Talks. You can find videos of the work that they're doing. Enjoy this interview with Matt. There's much to learn and much to be inspired by. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Leading Lounge. Got an exciting guest with me today. It's actually the first guest I've had that I have no prior connection to, Matt. So I got connected with you through just kind of a mutual acquaintance, and grateful for your willingness to jump on the show. So the first question I ask everybody is just, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and professional journey that got you to where you are today with Water4?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Matt Hangen, currently CEO of Water4. We're a nonprofit that starts for-profits in Africa. And so we take a business approach to the water crisis. And that's because we believe business is the only thing that creates resources, and poverty is a lack of resources. And so we felt like the charity-based approach, we just kept, providing sort of a stopgap of aid, but we weren't actually creating anything to combat poverty that existed in communities. So I'll get to that, I'm sure, later, but I've been in that role since 2017, leading the organization. I was just telling somebody the other day, my first job was a floor sweeper and a salvaged nut and bolt sorter. Where I went into a shop, the guy had like 10 buckets of nuts and bolts and these like plastic guides that you like took the nuts and bolts out of the buckets and had to sort them all into bins by size. Wow. Thread type, size, metric standard, which seems like one of like Dante's tasks for, a level of hell now. So it seems like a long, arduous journey from floor sweeper and fan cleaner to CEO. I got here by grace of God, good people, and my professional journey has been one where I was a missionary in Africa, a youth minister, and then a missionary in Africa. I started drilling wells in Africa. Kind of got onto something by starting businesses there because we didn't have enough money to finance the wells as a ministry. So we were asking communities to co-fund these things with us. And that process of having to get funding from people and just saying, hey, this is, we're going to participate in the solution together, created like a novel set of tools that I had that Water4 was looking for. And so they were trying to do a business-based approach. I knew how to weld. I knew how to drill wells. I had like a teaching background. And I just said yes to everything they asked me to do, traveled around the world, broke a bunch of stuff, made a bunch of mistakes, but I didn't give up. And so I think my journey has been just continuing to try to make this thesis of using charity to end the need from charity, believing that local people just needed knowledge and empowerment and belief and mentorship, and we didn't need to perpetually send people from the outside to solve people's problems. And a bunch of people having a lot of grace of big knucklehead trying to learn how to lead.
But you had the willingness, which was maybe the most important ingredient. So what's the timeline like? How long from the time you were sorting nuts and bolts to now?
Yeah, well, I've been in the sorting nut and bolts in 97, something like that. Yeah, I worked my way up in these machine shops. They were great training. I got to move my way up to powder coater and bandsaw operator and drill presses, and then I don't know if it's powder coater, and then CNC lathes, and then I'd run these big CNC presses and lathes. And it was great to have this level of responsibility working with titanium and stuff at a young age. Thought I'd be a mechanical engineer is what I was kind of on track to do before I had this spiritual, turnaround when I was 17. I was a youth minister from a year and a half into being a Christian from 2001 all the way until I left for Togo in 2008 at a small church in Alabama. And then I was in Togo from 2008 to 13, started working for Water4 in 2011 while we were there. And then 13 to 16, I was in a couple of different program roles here, just doing international operations, started to build a team. 16, I got asked to be chief operations officer. 17, they asked me to be managing director, which is like in lieu of CEO. They gave me a position to where if I screwed it up, they could still keep me. Then at 18, they gave me the title of CEO. I've essentially been leading since 2016, but the board was gracious enough to give me these chances to sort of grow into the position over time.
Yeah, very cool. So just curious, the shift from doing all that, kind of like blue collar stuff in Alabama or wherever you were to Africa, was that like a natural transition, or was that something where it was like you had this kind of I don't know, revelation, come to Jesus moment, and in your mind you were totally switching gears and switching fields or something?
I know that when they asked me to be, it was really in 16 when they asked me to be the COO. I was like, oh, this is a moment for you to change the way you see yourself, Matt. This is a moment for me to sort of grow up in some ways. But I'd always sort of led with sweat equity. I've been the guy in the field. I'd work, get up earliest, work longest. That's how my leadership style's always really been, just drive, work hard. And that's kind of how my, blue collar mentors were, work hard, don't complain, don't get. So with the COO roles and the management roles that I've had, it's been hard. I mean, it's a hard transition to go from sort of a culture of, I don't want to use any derogatory terms. It was such a good place, a good experience to have growing up, but I just didn't learn a lot of leadership tools, when I was younger. Mm-hmm. Didn't have a lot of them. And the higher up in management leadership I got, the more tools I needed to have.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, you should stop just wearing Columbia fishing shirts and carpenter pants. You should, buy some dress clothes and
throw a blazer on every now and then.
Yeah, I went to JCPenney's and was trying to buy a suit, I knew I'd have to be a public speaker. And so I knew I'd have to get over my fears of public speaking and really, step on the stage and be more articulate and make a big transition. And I have. I lost 120 pounds. I have changed the way that I speak and interact with people.
Hmm.
It's been like a constant editing process of my own self since I got the opportunity to lead at this level.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, that was kind of leading to one of my questions. I was going to ask you was when you go from like drilling wells and just kind of where you're just a subject matter expert on a particular skill to a more of administrative oversight role, it can be a lot of change. And in your case, I don't know exactly what Water4, like the numbers, but I know it's a multi-million-dollar organization, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We're 11.7 here, over half there in revenues, over 12 million.
Yeah. So you go from being essentially like a well driller to CEO of a $12 million company. So the public speaking part you mentioned, but like, I don't know, maybe the work ethic. What's something that transitioned well from just being Matt the well driller to CEO, and then what's something maybe you're still relearning from Matt the well driller to Matt the CEO?
I think growing up with a lot of scarcity, which is a good way to say we were poor,
Yeah,
helps you to be real pragmatic about how you use, your resources. Or in my case, it did. I think what transferred well was just cost benefit analysis. I've always had a good cost benefit, instinct. And so when, even when we drilled wells in Togo, I always had spreadsheets. I was watching my inventory. I was watching my cash flow. I was watching my, cost per units. I was doing all that stuff with, $5,000 budget. I was doing it with $150,000 budget. I was eventually doing it with $800,000 budget. So I always had like just common sense on this is not a net benefit. And I've always had, I think, when you don't have a lot of money, it's always created intuition to me of like what's coming down the pike. And so I always had a sense of like, 18 months from now, this is going to be a problem. And,
right.
need to do something about it. It's always like a lot of high efficiency financially. And that I leaned us up my first year. That was one of the biggest things I did is that we lost funding, but I leaned us up and we didn't slow down.
Right.
And that was big because we had a big funding reduction and we kept the same outputs and we started to grow number of wells, number of people served on the same dollar. That transferred really well. I think that gave the board confidence for whatever failings I had. I was leaning us up and moving us faster.
Yeah.
What I had to learn how to do was fundraise, align our strategy with other people's strategies, and then start to grow our top line revenue. As I was good at leaning us up and gaining efficiencies, but then we had like a 3-year period of time where we didn't really grow financially. And so we're at around 5 million when I came on. And so then it was like learning really how to build strategies for scale, how to engage different funding markets.
How'd you learn that? I mean, I'm sure it's a different approach. Did you talk to people, read books, go to seminars? Like, what'd you do?
Yeah, all the above. I, traveled. I got a couple of good hires that came on in the short term that were just really experienced, who I got to learn from. It didn't stay long. Most fundraisers don't. And then I've been really fortunate the last 3 years. We hired a consultant who stayed on and became our CRO that has been really just a source of wisdom for me.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a conference early on and just noticed how everyone was talking. It was area based to measure for funders. And we were drilling wells, just kind of helter skelter. And we needed a way to make the programs more financially lean to cover their own operations costs. And I noticed the donors were looking to measure impact and we were looking to gain efficiency. And so that was a big aha for me as I learned the overlap of what we needed to make water businesses work at scale, how to message that to a donor to say, how do we measure impact at scale? And when I slid those two, maps on top of each other, we had something that really could win.
Yeah.
And our design to build up sustainability and profitability for water companies ended up intersecting with the donor market wanting to get water right into people's house. And that's what the customer in Africa wanted too. And so we have gotten ahead of the market and now they're catching up with us. And so we're poised for pretty continued growth year over year.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, that seems to be, in my own experience and other people I talk to, just kind of those growth challenges, personally are always the hardest because you have one skill set. Like, I think I'm probably like you in the sense that I'm good at being lean, but I'm not so good at growing after we get lean. And so just growing and figuring out how to scale as your career progresses is always a challenge.
No, it's like tuning an engine. If you get things too tight, you'll seize. If you get things too loose, you'll blow apart. And it's a real finesse to try to learn when to turn on and off those different instincts you have.
Yeah, and it's like you never quite master it, because then as soon as you get over here, well, then you need to tune and adjust a little more and fine tune it, and so you can never quite settle. But yeah, so one of the questions, Matt, I was curious. You have like the skill set and the brains to, like start your own company and be a bazillionaire, it feels like, but you're drilling wells in Africa, right? So you have to have like some kind of a sense of calling for what you do. And you were a missionary before you were doing this. So with a guy like you who sounds like a strategic thinker, how much of your journey would you say has been planned strategically? Which you already said, like you just said yes to everything, so maybe it's not that much. But how much of it has been planned strategically, and how much of it would you say has just been you living out your sacred calling and kind of God opens doors and you just walk through them?
Yeah, I think I was just bound and determined to blow myself up for the majority of my life, to be honest. I became a Christian and just identified with the Apostle Paul, and I thought I'm just going to run into danger, head first and say yes to everything. And I just really felt that sense. I'm going to go to the hardest place I can find in the world to serve. I'm going to drink the water and work 60 hours a week and just about do everything I can to self-destruct. And I've kind of kept that on till I haven't stopped. I've like had that sense of direction. And other people have said like, "Hey, you're actually useful. You should not die." And try to roles. And so it's usually been like other people, like our board chair, Water4, like hired me when I was disabled, sick, bedridden for almost 6 months.
Wow.
Terrible condition. Hires me so I can have health insurance, gives me a job, says, we want you to do this, why don't you do this, and why don't you do this. And so I think it's just really been until recently that I've had people around me that have said, you have a unique skill set that brings a lot of value. And, they're like you, they like you might say, well, you could have done X, Y, and Z. Well, I think I didn't have enough sense to do X, Y, and Z. This has been like a PhD in how to be Matt.
Yeah.
20 years. And so now I'm at a place where I'm like, oh yeah, I have a lot of options. I have a lot of things I can do, but I also love what I do and really called to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have a master plan for my life by any means. I thought I'd move to Africa, do missions for 10 or 20 years, come back, get a PhD, and then teach. It's kind of what I really thought I would do. And that's because I was so troubled as a kid. This like spiritual encounter I had was such a pivot for me. I really was just so grateful that I wasn't in so much emotional torment, that I was just happy to have a second chance at things. And that's still kind of how I feel. It's like I just feel a deep sense of gratitude that my life is what it is today, because I recognize how much dysfunction it could have instead.
Yeah. You reckon if you could go back to like a younger version of yourself, if you would have had this master plan, would it have looked anything like what you've got now?
I was so impulsive and reactive; it wouldn't have done any good.
Yeah.
There's a few books I'd bring myself, like that really had a big impact. Maybe try to introduce me to some of these mentors that have had such a big impact at an early age.
Mm-hmm.
But this illness I talked about, I mean, I was at the point of death for 5.5 months. And that really is what sort of slowed me down enough to have me really contemplate, deeply contemplate. And that sped up probably about 25 years of trial and error that would have taken me to learn that lesson when I was 47 instead of 27.
Yeah.
That's been the greatest gift for me, I think, is just it kind of put me on a trajectory to really say life is short, life is precious. What do I want to do? What type of impact do I want to have? Who do I want to be? I tell myself as a kid, if I went back in time, I mean, just to one, like that I'm enough, that I don't have to keep trying my whole life to get affirmation that I'll never get, just to be at peace with who I am and enjoy what's around me. That's probably what I would say. I wouldn't listen to it, but
yeah,
that's what.
The younger you wouldn't even listen to the older you.
No way.
Well, this sickness you got, I'm just curious, is this something you picked up on the mission field while you were out over in Africa?
Yeah, so I have this hereditary, I have like a genetic inflammatory conditions, ankylosing spondylitis and axial arthritis. It runs in the male side of my family. It goes back to our like Viking ancestors. I got Shigella, Salmonella, E. coli, and amoebic dysentery, which set this stuff off. And now I've got like thyroid disorders and metabolic disorders. And my body turned inward on itself, and my gut was destroyed, my immune system destroyed, and then all these inflammatory issues came out, cut off blood flow to my eyes, swelled my hands up, my knuckles split open, my fingernails fell off, sores on my legs and knees, had my knees, my feet. I mean, it was a mess. It was like at the point of death from internal inflammation. 30 drugs a day, morphine, Demerol, just to breathe, to get through pain. That just could have trapped me in my body for that whole time, and trapped just as a state of mind because I couldn't be physically active at all. I was packed in with ice with pillows underneath all my joints on bed. That was like really, really painful, but it was really good because it started a period of contemplation that, is carried through, keeps bearing fruit, just about every day.
Well, I'm glad you're not there anymore. I'm glad you're out of that. And yeah, it's interesting how God uses those periods to teach us things that maybe we wouldn't even sit still enough to listen, but that we need to do whatever the thing is that he's called us to do down the road. So,
yeah.
Well, one question I like to ask everybody, Matt, and I'm always curious, everybody I've talked to has a different answer, and it's always an interesting answer, but communication is one of the focuses of the podcast and a particular just kind of personal interest of mine. So I like to ask everybody to tell me about a time when you failed at communicating, because I think people can identify more with your people's failures than they can their successes, because everybody knows what failure feels like. But anyway, what did you learn from it, and how did it change your approach to communication, if at all, after that?
Yeah, I'll just share it's like this year I've been really trying to focus on a Socratic form of communication. So my instinct is like to convince, to like argue, basically, like to like I'll use logic and I'll use, get all the facts and figures and information and let me convince you what's wrong. And then people are not convinced.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this whatever dysfunctions in my brain. It's taking me this long to even realize it. And so I read like all of Socrates's dialogues that Plato and Xenophon wrote, just trying to like understand this Socratic style and Socratic person.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say just about all my communication failures are when I'm really sure of an idea and I fail to listen to other people. I fail to ask questions that help people and help me see whether people's ideas are consistent, or they're consistent at a large scale and a small scale. And I just get so excited that I forget that sharing an idea is not the best way to communicate. The best way to communicate is really to get other people on the learning process and learning journey that I'm on.
Mm-hmm.
So like 2 weeks ago, I made this mistake with our team. We got, changes happening, and I told everybody, the rational reasons why. And then it became an issue about me and them rather than an issue that they weren't a part of solving the problem with me. Now they have to deal with the changes I made rather than
inviting them to help make the changes.
Yeah, by asking, what should I do? What would you do in this situation? What do you see with this problem? And then they would have the same journey, because I did all those same questions myself. But I think as the more people you lead, the less you need to be dictating leadership, and the more you need to be framing questions for people,
mm-hmm.
so they can learn to, process, make good decisions, use their wisdom, feel like it's their solution and not yours. So that's probably one of the biggest, I think, from blue collar to management, still not white collar, but is like, that's been the biggest struggle. Is it was a good thing to know how much cement to use, or, know
right
how to tell people how to do things.
Yeah.
That's a good manager skill set, but strategic leaders need to ask good questions. And that's probably the biggest communication lesson I have to suggest others pursue along with myself.
Yeah. No, I just was telling somebody, and I use the analogy of parenting. I was like, that the Socratic method is to me like a form of empowerment. It's like I'm empowering you to solve this or whatever, but part of the struggle, like with parenting, is like, it's much easier for me to just do it myself, whatever the task is, because I know how to do it and you don't, and you're going to ask 15 questions and you're going to, like, everything's going to be wrong. And, like, it's going to be so much harder. But I'm raising you to be more than what you are today, so it feels like that same kind of approach to leadership.
We kind of like to hear ourselves talking because it's like reassuring of how, stinking brilliant I am. And so that's the other part of it. It's like, you realize how much of this instinct is out of my own need to, show everybody that I've thought it through as compared to, having people be a part of the solution, me being genuinely curious in their perspective. And those are the hard levels to get down to. Is like, what does it actually say about me that I don't ask these questions?
Right.
That's been the part I've been trying to edit,
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. I'll say this and then I'll move on to my last question I had for you. But I had a boss. I actually interviewed him in the last season of this podcast, but I told him his best boss I ever had. He was a military guy, special forces colonel, and I'm an Army chaplain, so I was his chaplain, and he had this quote that I was like, man, that's always going to stick with me. But he said, micromanagement is the sincerest expression of personal insecurity, or something like that. It's like everyone who's micromanaged me, it's been stemming forth from their own personal insecurities, and I vowed to not do that, which I thought was pretty insightful.
That is.
All right. I love stories, Matt, and you a missionary. You spend much time on the mission field. So I found that military people have great stories, and I found that missionaries have amazing stories. So the only other question I had for you was, and maybe some stuff you can't share publicly, but what's the best story from the mission field that you can share publicly?
I mean, like the most extreme thing I've ever had is being in the heart of DRC in the Ituri rainforest. And we're there with the Mbuti, which are like a pygmy people that live there in the rainforest, drilling a well. We literally had to fly well drilling equipment over down bridges, land in a field, unpack everything by hand, go into a forest, drilling a well. And if you're drilling, sometimes you have collapsing. You have to have an outside casing and drill inside it and keep fluid on top of it, keep hydraulic pressure in the pipe to keep the mud from filling the hole as you dig it. So you can actually dig and the earth will just fill this hole back up with mud as you go down. So we're up on sticks. We've made scaffolding out of tree bark. We're 15 feet off the ground, drilling in a rainforest. There's no hardware store, so we have to make everything. The pygmies are like hunting these miniature antelope to bring for us to eat with nets. And there's like this spiritual warfare stuff happening where they're like seeing ancestral animals come at night and seeing us like pray, and the spirit, they're like seeing all this like spiritual interactions happen around us and relaying these things to us. It was a full moon. There was like a flock of butterflies that came in the morning after they said a bunch of stuff happened with their ancestral spirits that left at night, and they're like landing all over us. It was the weirdest, like most beautiful thing. And they're playing traditional music under the full moon and they sound like birds. It's like polyphonic singing where they have these tight harmonies.
Wow.
And so you're just out here in the middle of nowhere.
And this is all happening while you're drilling?
This is while I'm drilling a well, in the middle of a rainforest, in DRC. So much stuff happened in one trip, where the Congolese drill team was having dreams about, giant serpents coming through, and then the unprompted, the chief leader would come over and say, we had dreams that, our ancestors came in the form of a spirit, and the guy next to me already told me this before breakfast. So he and I are sitting next to each other. He's turning white, and I've heard it before the guy told me. It's like weird, crazy stuff where it's hard not to believe in, a spiritual dimension in those sort of contexts. And I, didn't have frameworks for everything that was happening all at one time. We ended up getting them well in, worked into like 11 p.m. at night, first well that people group had ever had, and established them with human dignity that they didn't have before that point in time. They actually started a church there, and just tremendous location, craziest thing I've ever been a part of. Never been so far out on the edge of, my every comfort zone that I could possibly have had.
Yeah.
We had leafcutter termite ants come and eat all our duffel bags. We carried military duffel bags to carry tools in. They ate all the bags. It's just like you couldn't be more vulnerable. You felt like the whole place was trying to consume you on every level, and
Wow.
you're out there trying to give life. So spent a couple weeks, out in that context, and coolest thing that I've gotten to, participate in.
Yeah, very cool. Well, off script question before I let you go. What's the most satisfying thing for you about your role now as a leader? Because you've got, I imagine just the well, drilling wells is satisfying, building, revenue streams to support that. So you're always not relying on, outsiders or whatever. And then there's, I'm sure, the personal fulfillment of just growing as a leader and seeing things grow, seeing Water4 grow. But I don't know, what's the most personally fulfilling thing about what you do?
I think it's been like the like team both here in the States and in Africa, like seeing people grow. Like we got a guy running, he's got close to 200 employees in Southern Ghana. That was a college student who did survey work for us 6 or 7 years ago. He came out and just did house to house surveys, and seeing him now manage this whole country program, seeing that transformation, basically people paralleling the experience I've had. And we hired a young woman here at our headquarters, and she came in new with not a whole lot of experience. And last year there was a moment where she was on stage talking about Water4, really impressive presence and message. And, I thought to myself, wow, this is really cool. I've seen this person transform in 3 years in a really big way. And so I think those are the coolest parts of my job, is I start to see these big growth parallels that I've got to experience in others. And it's nice to think that I'm a small part of providing to others the opportunity that I got provided in my life too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, it's always, I found that whatever the field is, engineering, military, church work, whatever, in the end, it's always the change that happens in people that you get to be a part of that's the most satisfying part, where you're like, okay, this matters. This is important. This is bigger than the task that we're doing. So appreciate you sharing that. But yeah, man, well, I appreciate you giving me some time. I know you're a busy guy, and grateful for your time. So thanks for sharing some with me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Enjoy it.
All right, thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see y'all next time. Thanks for joining us today. The Leading Lounge is brought to you by Communicate to Care, where we are building better leaders by building better people. For more information, visit us online at www.communicatecare.com. This is your host, Dr. Justin Dubose, and we'll see you next time, right here in the Leading Lounge.